Good evening. My name is Maggie, and on behalf of Book Soup, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for a virtual event this evening with Sarah Fay and Porochista Khakpour's discussing Pathological, the True Story of 6 Misdiagnoses. We're so excited and grateful that our bookstore can continue to bring authors and their works to our community during this time. We'll be hosting more virtual events in the near future, and you can learn about them on our website, booksoup.com, as well as our social media at BookSoup. Support our bookstore and our authors and purchase a copy of tonight's featured book. Just click on the green purchase button that reads Pathological directly below the viewer screen. The link will redirect you to our website where you can continue your checkout process. We're selling digital audiobooks and ebooks through Libro.fm and Kobo for those who are interested. If you'd like to ask a question during the event, please use the Ask a Question box at the bottom of the screen and type it in. Please do not use the sidebar chat to ask a question. Again, if you have a question during the event, please enter it in the Ask a Question box at the bottom of the screen and do not put it in the sidebar chat. A little more about Sarah. She is an author and activist. Her writing appears in many publications, including Long Reads, The New York Times, Atlantic, Time Magazine, The New Republic, McSweeney's, The Believer, God bless, we will always miss you, The Believer, and the Paris Review, where she served as an advisory editor. She's the recipient of the Hopwood Award for Literature, as well as grants and fellowships from Yaddo, the Mellon Foundation, and the MacDowell Colony. She's the founder of Pathological, the movement. If you want to visit her website, it's www.pathological.us, a public awareness campaign devoted to making people aware of the unreliability and invalidity of DSM diagnoses and the dangers of identifying with an unproven mental illness. A little more about Porochista. Her debut novel, Sons and Other Flammable Objects, was a New York Times Editor's Choice, one of the Chicago Tribune's Fall Best, and the 2007 California Book Award winner in the first fiction category. Her second novel, The Last Illusion, was a 2014 Best Book of the Year, according to NPR, Kirkus, BuzzFeed, Pop Matters, Electric Literature, and many more. Among her many fellowships is a National Endowments for the Art Award. Her nonfiction has appeared in many sections of the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, Elle, Slate, Salon, Book Forum, among many others. And she is currently a guest faculty at VCFA and Stonecoast MFA programs, as well as a contributing editor to the Evergreen Review. It's a lot for both of them, both very accomplished. And without further ado, I'm going to turn the camera over to Sarah and Porochista. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Sarah, it's such an honor to be with you. I feel like it's so exciting to celebrate you. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to have you read, and then we will be in conversation, and then hopefully you guys will all have questions too. I think authors always love questions, and it's such a treat for us to have that extra interaction. It's kind of fun. So I will look at the chat too, so Sarah can focus on other things. But there's an Ask a Question button. And there's another button there that's very important, the Purchase Pathological Here button. And I really highly recommend you press that, because I blurbed this book. I guess I saw it a while ago, Sarah, almost like a year ago, maybe. And I mean, and Sarah wrote me just a very sweet, email, and it was only if you want to blurb it or whatever. And I was very interested in the topic, and then I could not put it down, which is not really an experience you usually have when you blurb. It's not like you're usually trying to help a fellow writer, but I had this feverish, oh my goodness, I'm so obsessed with this book experience. So you'll see, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah, but it is just total honor, because this is got to be one of the best books of the year. I mean, it's definitely one of my favorite books forever. So very excited to be here.
Thank you so much. And thank you to Book Soup for having me. And Porochista, thank you so much for being here. So I'm going to read just a little bit from about 3/4 of the way into Pathological, and then just one page or so from the prologue. And it's about 10 minutes. But just so you know about the book, there are 3 strands to it. So one strand is my narrative, my story of being diagnosed with 6 different mental illnesses, starting when I was 12 and through my 40s. And then the middle strand is a history and an investigation into mental health diagnoses, all of which come from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, otherwise known as the DSM, otherwise known as Psychiatry's Bible. And then the third strand is punctuation. And I have an obsession with punctuation, but the way it fits into the book, although it sounds a bit odd, it fits in on multiple levels. But what it is that when I first was diagnosed at the age of 12, shortly after that, a couple of years after that, I also had a sort of reckoning with my favorite teacher of all time, my English teacher in high school. And he told me that I used commas like I was decorating a Christmas tree, just like a little, like improvisation act. And I did. So that was, basically my life of diagnosis started right when my life of being interested in punctuation and how it clarifies and how it helps us communicate with each other and communicate with ourselves started. So that's how that is. So for this couple scenes that I'm going to read, I am living with my mother, and I'm on my 6th diagnosis. So at this point, I've been told I have bipolar disorder. I'm no longer able to live independently. I've been suicidal quite a lot, and I'm in my early 40s. So I think that's all you need to know. After Googling for some time, I found a bipolar specialist. It seemed too good to be true, an expert in my particular illness, my diagnosis, my bipolar. Dr. M would be all to me, psychiatrist and therapist. The waiting room of his office offered filtered water and little Dixie cups. On the phone, he'd said we'd meet to determine if we were the right fit. I'd already talked myself into believing that he, the bipolar expert, would help me make sense of my life, my thoughts, my diagnosis, my mind, once and for all. The door opened. A blonde, bright, but serious man poked his head out and called me in. He wore a comfy-looking cardigan sweater. His blonde hair was stiff and well-coiffed. He was young, but gave off an air of quiet confidence. I stood and followed him down a hallway of closed office doors, behind which were the other psychiatrists in his practice. His office was windowless and small. I sat on the gray couch, fake leather and overly cushioned. He sat in a desk chair close by. On his desk behind him was a can of grapefruit LaCroix. It read, naturally essenced sparkling water. Essenced seemed to come from a place where water sparkled and nothing went wrong. For 40 minutes, he asked me about my mental health history and a bit about my life. I told him about the other diagnoses and the hospital in Iowa and the image of me in the bathtub in Chicago, all of it. When we finished, I asked if I was bipolar. He was the expert. He would know. Turning to his desk, he picked up the LaCroix can. I wondered if he'd mind that it was warm. He faced me again, can in hand. Yes, I was bipolar. He slipped his finger under the tab and opened the can. When the scent of grapefruit reached me, it tasted of relief. That night, I filled out the life chart Dr. M had assigned me. Seated at the desk in my mother's study, I colored in the graph provided, blocking out years and writing in events, shading the highs and lows that could be considered bipolar episodes. It had the look of real data, bars jutting above the zero axis, the normal axis, and others falling below it. Months when the black mass or the sodden pit in my stomach was there and my mind slowed. Days and weeks when the splintering and cracking happened and I'd felt the urgent need to run or walk or dance to music only I could hear. The grandiose plans I'd had to finish my dissertation in 3 months, which I did, and still had to finish my novel in about the same amount of time, which I didn't. My life was no longer divided into weeks and months and years. It was made up of manic and depressive episodes. I leaned back in my chair and stared down at the chart. 20 years of hypomanic highs and depressive lows, 20 years of undiagnosed bipolar disorder. I put down my pen. My sessions with Dr. M revolved around my illness. His questions reframed events and interactions in terms of my bipolar. My past became reordered. Memories played at a slower or faster speed. The motivations behind this or that decision were different now that I saw them through the lens of bipolarity. His presence, just his presence, promised I'd never be suicidal again. The time between our sessions was interminable. Always there loomed the threat of another episode, depressive or manic, worse than the one before. Only he had the answer. With him, I managed my new life as someone with bipolar. Managed was a word I heard a lot then. Manage meaning handle, manage meaning cope. I learned more about bipolar disorder than any layperson should know. I subscribed to BP Hope magazine, a magazine for people with bipolar. The My Story column featured people who revealed their long battles with bipolar disorder. A country musician, an ex-model, a lawyer. I turned page after page of drug ads for Latuda and Abilify and other antipsychotics to the Ask the Doctor column, which covered the many medications I had to choose from. My mother asked to read it because she wanted to learn how to better support me. I let her. When she finished, she handed me the magazine, her face clouded with concern. "Are you sure you want to read that?" I said, "Of course," and asked why. "It's just so dark." The internet offered so much information, so much contradictory information about the natural remedies I could add. Folic acid and vitamin B12 were crucial to sound mental health. No, magnesium was. A high-fat, low-carb diet caused depression. No, a low-fat, high-carb diet did. Green and black teas were high in the amino acid L-theanine, which relieves stress and anxiety, but caffeine triggered manic episodes. The Mediterranean diet was the key to relieving depression, but only in smokers. Blogs on the Harvard Health website reported that there was overwhelming evidence for a connection between food and mental health, though others insisted further studies were urgently required to elucidate whether a true causal association exists. I scrolled down the Medical News Today website past an ad for Vraylar, an antipsychotic as yet unknown to me, to be told once again that bipolar might be caused by a chemical imbalance that may or may not be helped by fish oil and vitamin C. Website after website confirmed that my prognosis was grave. With the diagnosis, my life expectancy had shortened by 9 to 20 years. The illness would worsen over time, each manic or depressive occurrence increasing that likelihood. With each depressive episode, my risk of having dementia rose. There was a very good chance I'd never have a long-term relationship or hold a regular job. I'd relapse, I'd end my own life. The inevitable was coming: early death, more frequent episodes, relapses, suicide. I admitted to myself that I was, in fact, living, not staying with my mother. I registered with a disability at one of the universities where I worked. My diet became impeccable, my sleep regular when I wasn't in an episode, and my schedule precise. I rarely went out at night or during the day except to teach, walk, and run. I wrote my novel, I read, I watched Netflix, I prepped classes, I taught. I lost count of the number of times Dr. M told me how sick I was. The premise of our work together was that I was very, very ill. Occasionally, he agreed with first-person consideration that I was someone with a mental illness, not mentally ill. I was, as the cliche goes, more than my illness. It's not as if I could have questioned my diagnosis. Not admitting I was bipolar indicated a lack of insight or anosognosia, which meant I was in denial, which meant I was sicker than I thought. And I'm just going to read one section of the prologue. It's too easy to lay blame, but I do. I blame a book, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, DSM. How can I blame pages, words, letters, dots, dashes, lines, marks on paper? Because the DSM is powerful. Jeffrey Lieberman, former president of the American Psychiatric Association, called it, quote, the most influential book written in the past century. Sociologist Alan Horowitz writes that it controls the diagnoses we receive and how we think about them, which might be fine if the DSM had scientific merit, which it doesn't. Some of the most prominent psychiatrists have referred to DSM diagnoses as constructs and placeholders. Others have admitted that they have no reality, pathologize normality, or are made up. As former National Institute of Mental Health Director Thomas Insel put it, we, quote, actually believe diagnoses are real, but there's no reality. Alan Francis, one-time chair of the DSM-4 task force, is quoted as saying that DSM diagnoses confuse, quote, mental disorder with everyday sadness, anxiety, grief, disappointments, and stress responses that are an inescapable part of the human condition. Stephen Hyman, another former NIMH director, called DSM diagnoses, quote, fictive categories, and the DSM, quote, an absolute scientific nightmare. But I didn't know DSM diagnoses were invented and had no validity and little reliability until it was almost too late. Validity, which is considered the most fundamental principle in medicine, would mean that DSM diagnoses can be objectively measured, which they can't. Reliability assumes that multiple clinicians presented with the same patient can rely on the symptoms listed in the DSM and will consistently agree on the patient's diagnosis, which they can't. It's tempting to fault the DSM's authors, those members of the APA who wielded those words and punctuation marks. How else did so many unproven diagnoses end up on the most recent edition's many, many, many pages? Over the editions, the number of diagnoses and spectrums and subtypes has grown and grown. The DSM-5 clocks in at 947 pages with 541 diagnostic categories, compared to the scant 132 pages and 128 categories in the DSM-1. The DSM's authors might defend themselves by saying they just want to make sure those who need care receive a diagnosis, even if, and they leave this part out, DSM diagnoses are speculative at best. It's also tempting to reproach the psychiatrists and psychologists and social workers who level DSM diagnoses, even though they know those diagnoses are unproven. They claim they have to label a patient with a diagnostic code to satisfy the insurance company and to get paid, even if, and they leave this part out, it means letting a patient believe she suffers from a diagnosis that's essentially theoretical. And pharmaceutical companies who've benefited from the DSM's revisions, and the academic psychiatrists and researchers who've profited from and built their careers on pathologizing normal distress. But the words, so convincing, do the most damage. They've taken on a life of their own. The DSM has become, as some say, a work of culture. It's socially sanctioned. Many, many people believe it's a scientifically proven medical manual. It's not even close. Thank you.
Wow, it's so amazing to hear you read from that. It's just this book to me is just so incredibly necessary and something I keep thinking about because I went through a lot of similar experiences with misdiagnosis, of course. But I keep thinking and I know that in your website and in your bio, you also have the label activist too. And so you're an activist, and this book is also a great work of art. I mean, when you were describing the punctuation aspect, there's something so aesthetically compelling with how you weave in punctuation into this. And it's kind of a surprise element. That strand of it is I could imagine some boring creative writing professor be like, well, you don't really need that part. Basic plot or something.
I probably would have said that to a student of mine.
I could, sure. But it's such a delight. It's such this extra amazing part of the book. And so I just wondered if you could talk about, because as I was reading it, one of my big questions was how is this book actually created from the moment of inception to this? Because it's not a straightforward book the way you think, you can often see the bones when a writer writes a book, but this one actually I totally couldn't. So I very selfishly I'd love to know what it was like from the moment you had the idea to what we see now.
Yeah, I'm writing the sequel. That's my next book. And so it's great. But I was walking today and I was thinking, oh yeah, Pathological was so weird the way it was put together, because it felt like the way I'm writing this book is so new. And I thought, but this is the sequel. This is the second book. That doesn't make sense. But Pathological actually started as a collection of essays. So that was the kind of sort of aesthetic of it almost, or the controlling principle. And as you know, that's so different from memoir. And of course, I got in a conversation with an agent and she said, essays don't sell and, I can't do anything with this and whatever. And then I decided actually that I did want it to appeal to a larger audience. I was very intimidated by the long form though. And so then I wrote a piece for Long Reads and they published it about brackets and solitude. And then that just became the form. And I thought, okay, 14 punctuation marks, 14 chapters. I'll stuff everything that happened into these 14 chapters. And that was pretty much how it went. I think in the revisions, one punctuation mark changed, and then also a chapter was dropped. I had a chapter on the space bar, like why we have spaces between words, but that got cut because my editor was right. She's a great editor, and it just didn't fit. It had the wrong tone and everything. It was an essay I had written as well. So that was how it came together. And I think that's why, and I'm very lucky that I ended up with the agent I got, because, and I think I've mentioned this before, but that the agents I talked to told me to cut the punctuation. They were like, this doesn't work, or we don't get this, or, well, it wasn't that actually. I shouldn't say that. I think both of them said they loved it, but didn't think it would sell. And so again, it's just that I don't know how to market this thing, which I kind of sympathize with. I mean, I can't imagine how hard it is to have a book that you might even love and then feel like, but I can't do it. I can't do this, or I can't find a way to market this to editors, so that they feel like they can sell it or whatever it is. So, but I'm really lucky. The agent I ended up with, she loved it, and she felt like it offered a breathing space in the book. That it's such a dense book, and it's so not dense in a bad way, but it's such a heavy book. And, she thought in a good way, but that it gives you kind of a moment to catch your breath.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. It's also, I should mention, and it's hard to explain this to someone when they just pick it up. It's also funny. It's a funny book. As harrowing as it is, the humor is also this kind of surprise element. There's moments where I was like, I can't believe I'm laughing at this, but I am. But that was really important for my memoir too. So what about the role of humor? Was that kind of, obviously the humor's dark, but was that just natural for you in it?
Yeah. And I think it's really fascinating because I had tried to write, I was going to write a different new book. I had written about maybe a third of it. And it was about death. I thought of it being lighter and more humorous. And it's funny because the humor just wasn't working. So I think if you try to be humorous, it doesn't work.
That's true.
Because it wasn't that I wasn't trying, I wasn't trying, but it wasn't that I didn't want humor in there. I just didn't think about it. What was it like for you? What about?
It's such a weird thing because I felt like when I was in it, like at the worst of my crisis, there would be these occasional moments where things would get so incredibly bad, like incontinence. There's a really crazy topic that just is not really funny when you're going through it. But then there would be just moments where I'm like, oh my God, I'm like peeing or shitting myself or something insane like that would happen. So horrible. But I would have this brief second where I could see myself in the future laughing at this moment. And that would kind of help me survive the moment. But I don't know if that's a writer thing where we sometimes do things because they're anecdotally sound, or we can survive things because they're anecdotally sound. I don't know.
Well, I think it also says a lot about mental illness, because one thing I've been thinking about is I was so humorless during these years. I think about that so often. And so in the moment, I wasn't laughing, like there's no question. So I think and I'm not trying to say that people with mental illness are humorless, but I think that my experience was that I was holding on so tightly to just keep going and just to exist, that it just didn't have that levity. There was no levity in me. And I actually knew I was well because I laughed so much again.
Oh, that's so interesting. Well, also it's like with like humor and mental illness, there were times also that if I felt like when I was with a psychiatrist, I felt like if I made a joke about the thing, it made me seem all the more mentally ill. Right. So I felt also like very careful to not say things that were weird ever, even though naturally I am that person. But I think that's another burden that people who get these labels of mentally ill also, they have to like sort of either they have to perform that role or perform against it. And everything they say, like this doctor from your reading, the doctor who was just trying to remind you all the time that you're very sick. Mm-hmm. I mean, those are really powerful words to tell someone over and over again.
And that you will have this illness for the rest of your life. And now you mentioned I'm an activist, and that's, if I can just do, give two things to everyone, and please pass this on to your family and friends, and pass on the book too if you want. But the two things are just that no mental health diagnosis has ever been proven to be chronic, not ever. Wow. And our psychic suffering naturally is episodic. So we go in waves. It's not permanent and it's not consistent. And what DSM diagnoses and our mental health system has done is basically tells you have ADHD, you'll have it for the rest of your life. You have depression, you'll have it for the rest of your life. And that is not true. It's just, a lot of it is misinformation. I don't know where it's coming from on the side of psychiatry and other mental health professionals. I think some of it's ignorance, but anyway, this is just to say if I can give them that, and then just also to ask ourselves, is this situational? Am I going through something? There's a chapter in the book where my cat died of 16 years, and it was a huge loss to me. I was bereft. I mean, I grieved for probably 2 years. And so according to the DSM, I wasn't allowed to do that. I had major depression. I'm not allowed to grieve my cat. I could have at that time maybe gotten away with grieving a spouse or a parent or a child, but you can't grieve cats, and you can't grieve dogs, and you can't grieve the loss of a job or the loss of a boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever, on the gender spectrum. Like we are limited in what grieving can look like. And now, especially with this new diagnosis of prolonged grief disorder, and it's prevented us from saying, okay, maybe this isn't, maybe I need treatment and I want to go get treatment, but maybe this is situational, and that's okay too. But I don't have to think of it as something in me. So, yeah.
Right. It's so profound what you're saying. I'm going to go in and out of looking at the chat because I have a ton more questions, but I want to make sure I think the question right now that someone is asking is a question that many people will have. And I don't think you can spoil everything in the book, but it's a great question. Please talk about your healing. What did you do to get better? I'm sure this is a question you get every time.
This is my new book.
Wow.
That's the sequel is how I got well. And so it's a longer story, but one thing I'll say is that when I was scared to say that, I will, that's a lot of the book, is that I didn't even feel like I had the right to say that I would ever heal or that I could fully recover. There was none of that anywhere on the internet. That has since changed, and I'm very grateful. Thomas Insel, who I mentioned in the book, he was a former head of the National Institute for Mental Health, and he just put out a book called Healing: Our Path from Mental Illness to Mental Health. And he is, he's an incredible researcher and a prominent man. And he's done two things. But one is that mental illness is not chronic. We can all heal, is what he's saying. And so when he said that, and it's funny, I then went and tracked him down and interviewed him. And, basically I was so starstruck when I met him. Other people, it's the Kardashians. And I'm like, oh, Thomas Insel, I can't believe I'm meeting him all flesh. But I told him, he really then put me on the road to feeling like, okay, now I can help other people, get well, because now I don't feel like, wait, maybe this is just something inside me. I've got to keep it quiet. I would occasionally say to my parents and my family, my sister, that I think I'm well. Like, I think everything's okay. And that, that I really have fully recovered, but I was always very secretive about it. But I will say the premise of the new book and the premise of Pathological, everything to get here, I had to go through everything that I went through in Pathological, meaning in Pathological, I put in my story, but also everything I wish I'd known about mental health diagnoses. So the book is just a gift to this entire country and the 46% of American adults and 20% of American children and teenagers who will receive a DSM diagnosis or 2 or 3 or 4 in their lifetimes. So I just wanted everyone to know what I wish I'd known and not go through what I went through. But the main thing that has helped me and really started me on the road to full recovery and to health is I no longer associate with a diagnosis. Now, I believe I had mental illness. I have zero shame in that. I'm very proud of it. I think people with mental illness are the strongest people around, and we are not looked at that way. But anyone who's touched it knows how strong you have to be to survive it. And so just knowing that, I still take medication. I still see a psychiatrist, but I don't know what my diagnosis is. So so it's on the books. Someone could probably hack my psychiatrist's office or something and find out. But I don't want to know. My psychiatrist now, who is someone I respect greatly, he's in the book, and he really also set me on this path in that it's in the book, but when Dr. M and I finally have a big falling out, I'm out of medication and I'm suicidal, and Dr. M won't refill my medications. He's angry at me for wanting to leave. It was extremely dysfunctional. And my sister and my mom, they're all the heroes of this book, my whole family. I mean, the families are always the heroes in these situations. But my sister found a psychiatrist. I went to go see him. We had our, initial consultation. It was 27 minutes, and I waited for him to proclaim my new diagnosis or confirm that I was bipolar. And he looked at me and he said, "I don't know what you have." And that broke my brain. I just finally realized no one knows. And then I started researching what our mental health diagnoses are. I wanted to know where they come from. Are they valid? Are they real? Are they reliable? Why have I gotten 6 and I still don't feel better? Why have I gotten 6 and been put on all these medications and I'm not well yet? That doesn't make any sense. How can they even give me 6 different diagnoses? So all this was going on in my head. But since I've seen that psychiatrist, he's changed my diagnosis 3 times. And I said, I don't want to know. So that has been crucial to my healing. And I was at dinner the other night with my family. I love my family. They've been amazing. I had the worst panic attack. I mean, it was just awful. It was hideous. And if that had happened before, and no one knew, I mean, I went through it. I've been through them a lot. I was able to say oh, yeah, we're not going to die. It's just a panic attack. I mean, it wasn't that easy. I'm making it look easy.
Yeah.
What a panic attack knows. I went through the whole thing. But that would have sent me into a spiral. It would have confirmed my diagnosis. It would make me run to my psychiatrist. I might change my meds. I might, and all of that. That's the other thing I do not do is I don't change my meds. It would take a catastrophe for me, something very serious, because it just led into this cycle of once you change this, you change that. And what I found is in psychiatry, you're changing too fast. My body wasn't even acclimating. I have a very sensitive system. And so they change a med or take me off one and put me on one. But then meanwhile, your life is happening to you as well. So you're reacting to your environment and you're emotionally reacting to people and your job and yourself. And so, yeah, so that's what I'll share for now. It's just that I don't think we should get rid of diagnoses. We need them. They're useful. We need them to file for disability and to get educational services and in legal situations. So that's not at all what I'm calling for. It's just to move the conversation and our own awareness past them. We seem to be just getting diagnosed and stopping there. And the diagnoses don't hold the answers.
Right. I can't even tell you how relatable what you're saying is, though I wish I had the, incredible intelligence to say, I don't want to know my diagnosis. There's such a power in that. I feel like only as you get older do you realize how powerful not knowing is. I think when you're very young, you just want to know everything and you want certainty and absolute everything. And American culture is very all about that certainty, answers, and I think that alone, I mean, this book, I really believe can save people's lives 100%. But even just that one idea that you just put out there, someone suggesting to their psychiatrist that, by the way, I'm going to see you, I'll take the medication, but maybe we don't need to define it. Or a psychiatrist proposing that would be incredible too. And I don't know why people don't do that more. But that idea is just amazing to me. That would have saved me years of anguish, just that idea.
You know what's so fascinating is the only reason I thought of that is because of all this research I did. And originally DSM or any mental health diagnosis was for physicians only. As a patient, you never knew your diagnosis.
Wow.
That was new. That was like post 1980s that people even started to know. I mean, I guess that had happened probably occasionally, but like Susanna Keene's, her Girl Interrupted. What's fascinating about that book, it's a memoir of her time at McLean in the 1960s, and she never heard her diagnosis. It was only later. And so anyway, I just think of, sort of in the 19th century, I think of just like, for some reason, psychiatric institutions or asylums, and you've got these patients that are just grappling with what they have. And I'm thinking about the good asylums, I'm thinking about the Dorothea Dix, like, she made, the people who created Thomas Kirkbride, they created these idyllic landscapes, not the bad ones. But so they created these idyllic landscapes, and, it had all this outdoor area, and the patients actually tended the gardens themselves, and they had music rooms and libraries, and every patient had their own room. I mean, and this wasn't wealthy. These were just regular asylums before they became overcrowded. And I just think of that time, and those patients never knew what they had. They were never told. They just healed. Like, it's possible to treat people and heal without us diagnosing on social media with TikTok therapists and self-diagnosing and creating diagnostic fads. And, it's not making us any better.
Yeah. I think of so many people I've been close to that had BPD. And with BPD, one of the first things it seemed, or they used to say, was always that the prognosis was very bad, and that you had to just be okay with the fact that you would die of suicide, and that I can't tell you how many times that idea would just come up with my friends who are going through it already. And it's like, it never sat right with me, to tell somebody that, and then to have them try to live their lives out and know that could be the ending. Obviously that could be the ending for any of us, but like, to tell someone, I still remember they used to toss out percentages of what percentage of people with BPD would die of suicide. And it was such a high number. It was really horrible. But I do think, like, somehow maybe we're seeing less of that because people are just seeing some of the harms. I hope your book will be part of that, like, because it's really terrifying. Feel free to, again, ask questions. I'm going to take a look at that. There's one other thought. Right before we logged on, and in our little discussion, you said something that I thought was so interesting and worth sharing, I think. When I was reading this, I kept wondering, what does everyone who's in the book think of it? Like, the family, the friends, the doctors, all that. I was so curious to know what their response is. And obviously, it, like, just came out recently, so maybe you don't know. But one of the things I thought was fascinating was when you told me what some psychiatrists have thought about your work, and, like, because I thought they're going to feel so threatened by this, and you will be, like, hunted down by psychiatrists. You'll have to go to hiding.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's been really fascinating, just that they basically pretty much across the board, and there are a handful of psychiatrists who are still sort of trying to pretend that the DSM is this great thing and there's nothing wrong with it. But it's pretty few and far between, which is scary, actually, and I'll explain why. But for the most part, psychiatrists are just sort of washing their hands of it. They're like, we know it's a mess. We don't know what to do. We're bound by it. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I say it's scary because the patients have no power right now. The patients don't know any of this. And we're all in it together. So what I'm hoping my book does is really bring us all together and give patients some power and kind of force psychiatry's hand. And not just psychiatry. I mean, what's different about my experience in my book, 5 of my 6 diagnoses came from primary care physicians. And primary care physicians are doing most of the diagnosing. So my book isn't anti-psychiatry in any way, because I actually have more of a problem with primary care physicians diagnosing psychiatric disorders when their training is the equivalent of binging on a couple of seasons of Grey's Anatomy, like that. And in time, that's all. And it's all inpatient. It's the worst cases. So that's more of my concern than anything else. So psychiatry has just sort of they feel bound to the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, this book. And it's often referred to as psychiatry's Bible because it was believed that everyone followed it to the letter and we followed it too closely. But that's not actually the case anymore. And I think you'd be hard pressed to find someone who does that. But it is this book that's intractable. Like we won't change it. We won't fix it. We pretend it's all okay. And we are not really handling it well. But in terms of what people think about it, I'm having like a small book party, like a book dinner party, and I invited everybody in the book. So, and actually it's being held at Chris's restaurant, Twilight Kitchen, shout out. So Chris from the book, but I decided that everyone's gonna get a name tag and then the chapter that they're in. The chapter.
Oh my God, how funny. Wow.
Or like what they were to me or something. But yeah, so.
Did they know they were in the book? Like, did you, because it's with writers, you never know what the right thing is. I mean, I did not show my book to all the people in the book before it came out, only some people knew.
Yeah. I was really lucky because I isolated so much of my life that I didn't have that many people to call. So it was a pretty small number, but I did. I mean, Paul, who's in the book, he was a roommate of mine in New York, and I was terrible to him. I mean, he really bore the brunt of when I was basically having a nervous breakdown. And so I had to contact him, hi, how are you? By the way, you're in a book. And then Chris and I, an ex-boyfriend, we hadn't spoken in maybe 10 years, and I wasn't great to him either. And hi, you're in a book, it's coming out. So I did wait until it was coming out. I thought, I'm not going to tell someone they're in a manuscript. That seemed a little bit lame to me. But once I knew it was on its way to being in the world, then I did. And everyone has been amazing, like just so supportive and forgiving and just fantastic.
Oh, that's so great. I know it's a worry for students, especially when they are like, should I write about all of it? And I'm always like, go for it. There's another great question. Oh, sorry,
I do have a rule, and I pass this on to my students, but I never write about other people's lives. And that makes me feel really comfortable. So if something's going on in my sister's life at the time, I would never write about it. If something was going on in my mother's life, like their lives are theirs to write about. But I'll write what happens with us, like between us. Like if they're there for something with me.
Right.
And I think that actually covers, like it protects, or it prevents any kind of trespass, like personal trespass.
Oh, yeah. That's a great rule. Yeah, that makes sense for sure. Yeah. Well, there's another great question from Jill. Can you elaborate on what you said about diagnostic fads, please?
Yeah. So there's something called false epidemics. And this is not a term that I came up with, but a false epidemic occurs so there's the DSM, just to give everybody an idea in case you don't know. It's a book, and it's just, you open it and it's got 541 different categories and entries and types. And basically, so if you walk through this with me, you've got the depression, right? So you've got, for instance, bipolar disorder, and then it will have a list, it will have different lists, but primarily of symptoms. So to be labeled or to be given a diagnosis of major depressive disorder, you have to have 5 of the 9 symptoms listed. So that's what the DSM looks like, basically. And what's kind of interesting is that it's not interesting, it's a scary, notion or aspect of this. But Robert Spitzer is a man, he's since passed, but he was one of the main architects of the DSM. And he was asked, why do you have to have 5 of 9 symptoms to qualify for a depression diagnosis? Why not 3 of 9 or 9 of 9 or whatever? And he said, we just went around the table. So a bunch of mental health professionals get around in a room and they hypothesize and theorize about what depression is and what it should look like. And when they came up with major depressive disorder, he said, we just went around the room and asked what people thought, and 6 seemed like too many and 4 seemed like too few. Like that's still the diagnosis we use. That's how arbitrary they are. So basically, so that's the DSM. And what happens is over time, what the DSM authors have done, their goal is to diagnose as many people as possible. That sounds very sinister, and I think it is, but at the same time, I believe that some of those people are doing it out of arrogance because they want to be proven right. And a lot of them think they're doing good. So a lot of them believe I'm getting people the help that they need. And the more people we diagnose, the better. So what they do is they loosen the criteria. So you used to have 5 of 9. It's still 5 of 9, but I'm just going to use depression as an example. You used to have 5 of 9. Well, now you only need 4 of 9, right? So you just start to loosen it a little bit. Or you say, actually, it has to happen it used to have to happen in a 2-week period. Now it can happen over 6 months. So it becomes easier and easier to diagnose. But what happens is there's a spin put on it by the media. And basically you've got more people being diagnosed. The media spins it as an epidemic, and that really all these people had depression but didn't know it. And we were all really, really sick, when in actuality, it just became easier to diagnose. And that's a false epidemic. And then they report on the false epidemic, and then people think they have it because their friends have it, and this and that. So the main false epidemics, the most the ones that are known the most and known the most about are ADHD, adult ADHD, which is not actually a diagnosis, by the way. Like, they just made that up completely. It was a childhood disorder. It was never meant to be for adults. And it was also always, you had to have ADHD, so attention deficit hyperactivity. Hyperactivity was the cornerstone of it. But what they did is they put a backslash in. This is where punctuation comes in. So they put a backslash so you could be just ADD, attention deficit disorder. And then now it's called inattentive type. But that's contrary to the core of what the diagnosis was. It was for children who had hyperactivity. Like, that was what ADHD was. Mm-hmm. So they loosened it, another example, and suddenly we had this ADHD epidemic. But really what that was they realized that they weren't diagnosing girls. And so if they pulled the hyperactivity aspect out, they could get girls as well. And again, it's sinister, and people think they're doing good. So like, it's just that we've got this book. I'm sorry, I'll finish what I was saying about the epidemics. But so basically it becomes a false epidemic. Autism was the other big one. So autism in general it increased 600% like within years. I mean, it was just a ridiculous. And it was really because what they did over time, one thing is, to receive an autism diagnosis for a long time, you had to have mutism. That was originally what made someone have autism, was the inability to speak. That was a long time ago, but so just to give you an idea, like, as it just became easier and easier. And then bipolar 2 was the other big false epidemic. And that's, bipolar 2 is, there's no such thing. That doesn't, no one found that in a blood test, right? So to be clear, no DSM diagnosis, none of the mental health diagnoses that we receive can be objectively proven. We can't take a blood test. There's no x-ray. We don't know what depression really is. We don't know if it exists in the brain. The chemical imbalance theory has been debunked. It's of the mind and the brain. I mean, these are all very difficult topics and things to get at, but we're treating them as if, no, it's concrete. Like, these are all biological, and here you go, and here's your diagnosis, and here's your medication, and just go. But that's not really what these are. They're more complicated than that.
Right. Wow. That's some amazing truths here. I mean, the other thing that I find really weird in the Lyme world, we use so much medication off-label. So sometimes that used to always, even though I was benefiting from that at times, I also was so uneasy because I would see my doctors put in fake codes so that I could get a certain medication. And sometimes they were psychiatric medications, but they were using it for some other reason or some off-label psychiatric use. And I would just sit there and watch them put in those codes. And I'd be like, wow, that's literally the only reason I can go and get this particular medication. But how arbitrary and the power there that it's just like, you know, it's really, to me, shocking. And I think that's why, like, I've seen also among a lot of my students and my communities, people basically like treating psychiatric drugs like street drugs and just like scoring them off each other. Adderall, you know, as like a study drug or a party drug, you know, that you can just get in all sorts of ways now. And, you know, it's a mess, you know. And I guess that's one of the things when I was reading this, because it is such an important, not only is it like a great story and really like beautifully written, I kept thinking too, like, this really, really is an essential form of activism, what you've done here. And so I kind of wondered, like, I mean, it's a little bit in the book, but like, what is your hope? Like at this point with this book in the world, what would you hope could happen? Is it that just we're all having these conversations now, or what are you seeing, or what are you hoping for? Maybe.
I want to change the world. I mean, I really do. I really would love to have this book have that effect and really reach people. But my primary goal was to give everyone the information they needed. That's what's in the book, and then wrapped up in a really juicy story. Like, that was how I designed the book. But beyond that, I started Pathological, the movement, which is a public awareness campaign. And that's really to get at what I was talking about, which is to let people know that the majority of when we have psychic and emotional distress, it's typically situational, meaning it will pass. But that doesn't mean you don't get hope. I mean, hope, or you don't have hope, or you don't get treatment. It doesn't mean that at all, right? So you still, what kind of has happened in the conversation around these things is either we shouldn't get any treatment or get any help and pretend that we don't have any, distress or suffering, or we should go just blindly into it and accept diagnoses and talk only of diagnoses. And that's, kind of where we're stuck. But what I hope is that there will be a conversation, not just a conversation, but that there will be full transparency on the part of mental health professionals and clinicians, to be sure that people know, like what you were just describing with off-label prescribing. The reality is that happens all the time in psychiatry. And we know so little about the mind and the brain and psychiatric disorders and mental illness, and that's okay. Like I'm not blaming psychiatry. In many ways, psychiatry's done some things wrong, but they haven't done anything wrong in this respect. And there's nothing wrong with prescribing off-label, because pharmaceutical companies are just coming up with drugs, don't know how they work really. And sometimes they're beneficial to people and sometimes they're not. I mean, this is the reality of what we're living in. The problem is people don't know this and they're being lied to. And they're being, they're not being told, what, I'm putting on a fake diagnostic code right now, just so you know. So if you see this on your medical records, you don't have borderline personality disorder. I'm just writing this down, and so, but we're not in on it. And that's what I want to change. So full transparency on the part of mental health professionals. And I would love to see primary care physicians taken to task, and either give it, to be more generous, that they are required to have more training before they're allowed, or to take some sort of extra courses before they're allowed to diagnose. At the same time, I understand why we want primary care physicians diagnosing, because a lot of people otherwise wouldn't have access to care. But we've overcompensated. We swung too far on the side of that pendulum.
Yeah, I never really thought about that, but I realized as you were talking that so many of my really bad diagnoses came from primary care physicians, who really sounded like because you always think, I also think, like, in our culture, we always weigh physical illness as having priority to mental illness, That's always like somehow more legit. So you think like, okay, a doctor that's dealing with the body is certainly more like skilled or somehow than a doctor who deals with the mind.
Well, and then, but you're getting a psychiatric diagnosis from a man in a white coat in a hospital. My primary care physician is telling me I have ADHD or OCD or major depressive disorder, whatever it is. Of course, I'm going to think they're as sound a diagnosis as cancer or whatever it might be. So it's very confusing.
Yeah, it definitely is. I think Cynthia, I think you're leaving a question in the chat. So go ahead. I think we have time for like a question or two. But we'll look to take your time there. Yeah, this is I really hope. I think you're already probably seeing there's a ton of buzz on it, and all the Prepub reviews have been so excellent. So it's, a very well positioned book. And I think you're also like, I kept thinking when I was reading it too, that like if this had come out even like 10 years ago, it would have been harder to have it in the world, because I think medical professionals felt more threatened. And I swear there was this one moment where I was like doing my own form of activism, warning people about like over like prescribed psychiatric drugs. That was always a worry of mine. And then someone said to me, they came up to me after an event and said, "Oh, I love that you're also a Scientologist." And I said, "What?" And she said, like me, I'm also a Scientologist. And I said, "I don't know where you got the idea." And she said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Well, I just assumed, we always warn people. That's something that I've only seen Scientologists do." And I was
Oh, yeah.
like, "Oh." So there's also this like weird stigma, like the minute someone sometimes talks about be careful with this stuff, then they immediately think like you're in on this other conspiracy, right?
Yeah, I think that is also something that's so different about my experience, in the sense of for the media and for maybe even publishing. But what I found, I mean, I'm hearing from so many people who share my experience of overdiagnosis, receiving multiple diagnoses, not finding answers in those diagnoses, but also maybe getting some relief from medication and then being dependent on those medications for whatever reason, and now can't get off them, and still, benefit from seeing a psychiatrist, maybe a therapist, whatever. So it's just more nuanced than, I think my story brings into the conversation, or I hope will bring a truer sort of aspect of what this experience is really like, which is that it's complicated and it's going to be different for everybody. But at the same time, we can right some wrongs, which is that these diagnoses aren't solid enough for you to revolve your life around. And I over-identify with and become the way I did, which is that when I was told I had manic depression, everything was about my depression. Like everything, every emotion, every thought, every behavior. Oh, it's because I have depression. And that's not going to lead, anywhere. It didn't lead me anywhere good.
I think that's the thing too, when you're like a high achieving person who's been rewarded for following the rules, and like I think a lot of really bright, sensitive people, they end up having these problems all the more because you get a diagnosis and you try to become a good student of that diagnosis and your medication and all that.
That's the best way to put it. I was going to be like an A student of my diagnoses. And what's also complicated about it is that also can sound like I'm saying it wasn't real. It was 100% real. I was suffering tremendously. And knowing everything I know now, if I went back and did it again, I might take all the same, I might accept the diagnoses I was given and take the same medications because I was suffering so much. It's just that looking back now, I see that identifying with the diagnoses just increased the suffering.
Right. Oh, that makes so much sense. Oh, thank you so much. Cynthia, I'm fortunately, I'm not seeing your question, but maybe, Sarah, can people maybe send to you their like questions? Are you getting emails and things like that? So
put it, that's my website, and then just go to contact and you can contact me.
Yeah, that would be great. I cannot hear. Muted. I think you're muted. Yeah.
There we go. Sorry. Do you have any final words for our audience?
Thank you so much for being here and for joining in the conversation and for supporting the book and just supporting what I hope is just a shift in the conversation around mental health, so we don't stop at diagnoses, but move past them in some ways.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That's a wrap in our presentation. Thank you again to our guests and to everyone who tuned in this evening. We greatly appreciate everyone's time and your support of independent bookstores. Support our bookstore and our authors and purchase a copy of tonight's featured book. Just click on the green purchase button that reads Pathological directly below the viewer screen. Know that all of the money will go to BookSoup and not to Amazon. So if you really want to get someone a present that matters and a present that makes a difference in the world, definitely get one for your friend, your parental figure, your DJ, anyone in your life who you want to help out just a little more. If you'd like regular updates on our upcoming events, make sure to follow us on Crowdcast and subscribe to our newsletter. Have a great evening and stay safe, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Everybody.